My older brother stole my car and some of my savings. It turns out my parents knew about it but lied to me because they wanted what was best for my golden brother. When I found out my car was missing, I didn't panic right away. I figured it was a mistake, maybe I'd parked somewhere else. But when I checked, the spot was empty, and the situation got worse from there. A chunk of my savings had been drained, and it didn't take long for me to connect the dots. My brother had taken them both. What shocked me even more was discovering that my parents knew about it. They covered for him because, in their words, he needed it more than I did. My older brother, Jake, had always been the family favorite. Growing up, he was the charming, easygoing one who got away with everything. Teachers adored him, coaches praised him, and my parents made excuses whenever he screwed up. I was the responsible one, the kid who did their homework on time, worked weekends, and saved money for things like college and a car. Jake didn't save. He borrowed. And when he borrowed, he didn't give it back. He went from job to job, always chasing big dreams but never staying long enough to make them happen. My parents' solution? He just needs time. But while Jake had time, I had responsibilities that I wasn't bitter, at least, not in the beginning. It's easy to brush off favoritism when you're a kid. But as we got older, the gap widened. My accomplishments earned polite nods, but Jake's smallest wins were treated like triumphs. I didn't expect much from him, but I did expect better from my parents. When I got home and saw the empty driveway, I figured there had to be some explanation. Maybe I'd forgotten where I parked, or maybe someone had borrowed it with a good reason. It wasn't until I'd spent an hour walking around the block and calling the local tow yard that I started to feel the weight of the situation. My car was gone, and I had no idea where or why. I went back inside, sat on the couch, and tried to think clearly. My mind jumped to something else. The emergency cash I kept hidden in a locked box in my bedroom closet. I wasn't paranoid, but I liked having cash on hand just in case something went wrong. I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled down the small metal box. When I unlocked it and lifted the lid, my heart stopped. The cash was gone, every last bill. I kept around $5,000 in there, savings I'd built over months by cutting back on expenses and picking up extra shifts. I rifled through the box, hoping I'd misplaced it somehow, but it was empty. Panic set in, but only for a moment. I quickly locked the box, shoved it back in the closet, and grabbed my phone. My parents had the spare key to my car and knew about the emergency cash. If anyone had answers, it was them. I called my mom first. She answered on the third ring, sounding cheerful as always. "Hi, sweetie. What's going on?" "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you have my car?" She hesitated. "Your car?" "No, why would we have your car?" "It's not in the driveway," I said. "And someone took the cash from my room." "Oh, honey, you must have just misplaced it," she said quickly, her tone too casual. "You've been working so much lately. Are you sure you didn't spend it and forget?" "I didn't forget," I said firmly. "The cash was in a locked box. Someone took it." She laughed nervously. "Well, maybe check again. Sometimes things get shuffled around." "Mom," I said, "don't lie to me. Did you or Dad give Jake the key to my car?" She didn't answer. "I'm not stupid," I continued. "I know Jake's been in trouble lately. Did you give him my car and the money?" There was a shuffle on the other end of the line, and then my dad's voice came through the speaker. "Jake needed a little help," he said, as if that explained everything. "He was behind on rent, and he had a job interview across town. We thought it would be fine if he borrowed the car for a few days." "And the cash?" I asked, my voice rising. "We told him to take just a little to cover the basics." My mom chimed in, sounding defensive. "We didn't think he'd take all of it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents had given Jake permission to steal from me, and they were acting like it was no big deal. "So you lied to me," I said. "You covered for him." "It's not like that," my dad said. "Jake's your brother. He was in a bad spot, and we thought he'd pay you back before you noticed." I let out a bitter laugh. "Right, because Jake always pays people back. This isn't the first time, and you know it." There was a pause, and then my mom tried again. "We'll fix this, okay? We'll make sure you get your money back." "That's not the point," I snapped. "The point is you didn't even tell me. You didn't ask. You just handed over everything I worked for like it was nothing." Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. My parents didn't have an answer for that, and I didn't have the patience to keep talking. "Where is he now?" I asked. "He's staying with a friend," my mom said. "But please don't be too hard on him. He's been under a lot of stress." I hung up without another word. Jake could run from his problems all he wanted, but this time, I was coming to him. Tracking Jake down wasn't hard. The GPS tracker on my car led me to a rundown apartment complex across town. The place looked like it hadn't seen a maintenance crew in years. Cracked concrete, rust-streaked stair rails, and a parking lot filled with cars that probably hadn't been driven in weeks. But there, parked right in the middle, was my car. I parked my ride a few feet away and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm myself. The thought of Jake sitting comfortably inside, while I was out here scrambling to find my stolen car and cash, made my blood boil. I got out and walked straight up to apartment 3B. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices coming from inside, Jake's, and someone else's. I knocked, and the room went quiet. Footsteps shuffled to the door. When it swung open, Jake stood there, wide-eyed like a kid caught raiding the cookie jar. Hey," he stammered. I pushed past him without waiting for an invitation. The place was a mess, pizza boxes on the floor, empty beer cans stacked on the windowsill. But what really caught my attention was the guy standing by the window, looking just as surprised as Jake. He was holding a wad of cash and a set of keys. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, glaring at Jake. "You're selling my car?" Jake rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "I wasn't selling it," he mumbled. "I was just, don't even try," I snapped, pointing to the guy by the window. "What's this, then? A friendly donation?" The guy, who looked like he regretted showing up, quickly shoved the cash into his pocket and headed for the door. "I'm not getting involved in this," he muttered, brushing past me. As the door closed behind him, I turned back to Jake. "How much?" He swallowed hard. "What? How much were you selling it for?" $3,000, he said quietly. I let out a bitter laugh. $3,000? It's worth twice that. You didn't even try to get a decent deal. You just wanted quick cash, didn't you? "I needed the money," he said, his voice rising. "I'm behind on rent. My roommate bailed, and you always need money." I cut him off. "And somehow, it's always my problem to solve. But not this time." Jake's jaw tightened. "I was gonna pay you back." "With what?" I snapped. "You don't have a job. You're out here trying to sell a car you don't even own. What was your plan, Jake? Hope I didn't notice until it was too late? I didn't think it would get this bad," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I shook my head, disgusted. "You don't think about anything, do you? You just do whatever you want and let Mom and Dad clean up the mess." He opened his mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. "I've had enough. You're going to hand over the keys right now, and I'm taking my car home. And you can tell Mom and Dad they're done covering for you. Because the next time you pull something like this, I won't be knocking on your door, I'll be calling the police." His face paled. "You wouldn't. Try me." For once, he didn't have a snarky response. He walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the keys, and handed them to me. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to say anything else without losing my temper. I just grabbed the keys and walked out. As I unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat, I felt the weight of everything settle on me. The stolen cash, the betrayal, the lies my parents had told to protect Jake. It was all too much. But one thing was clear. I wasn't letting any of them back into my life without consequences. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but I wasn't ready to explode just yet. That would come later, once I dealt with my parents. I parked the car outside my apartment, sat there for a minute, and stared at the dashboard. $5,000 gone, my car almost sold off to a random stranger, and all because my family thought Jake deserved another chance. I didn't even bother changing out of my work clothes before calling my parents. My mom picked up, and I didn't give her a chance to say hello. "I found my car," I said. "Jake was about to sell it. Did you know that?" The silence on the other end of the line confirmed what I already suspected. They knew. They always knew. "Sweetie, listen," she started, her voice calm, like she was trying to defuse a bomb. "We didn't think it would come to this." He promised us he'd only borrow it for a few days. Borrow it? I repeated, laughing bitterly. He stole it. He emptied my savings and tried to sell my car. How much worse does it need to get before you stop covering for him? We didn't cover for him, she protested. We were just trying to help. No, you weren't helping him. You were enabling him, I snapped. And you lied to me. You made me think I lost my car or that maybe someone else stole it. All while you sat there knowing exactly where it was. Please calm down, she said. We'll figure this out. We'll pay you back for the money. I clenched my jaw, pacing the length of my living room. It's not about the money anymore. It's about trust. You lied to me for months, and the only reason you're apologizing now is because I caught you. My dad spoke up then, his voice steady but firm. We made a mistake. But he's your brother. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? No, I said without hesitation. I don't think I'm being harsh. I think I've been too soft for too long. He always gets away with everything, and you always let him. Well, not this time. You're not getting me to forgive him just because you feel sorry for him. There was a long pause. I could hear my mom sniffle quietly on the other end, like she wanted to cry but knew it wouldn't work on me this time. So what happens now? She finally asked. Now? I said, exhaling sharply. Now I'm done. I'm done with Jake, and I'm done with the two of you making excuses for him. I'll figure out how to recover the money on my own, but don't expect me to come running back the next time he screws up. Don't say that, she whispered. We're a family. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. A family doesn't do this. A family doesn't lie to each other, steal from each other, and act like everything's fine. If you want to keep enabling Jake, go ahead. But I'm out. I hung up before she could respond and tossed my phone onto the couch. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing my ground. A few days later they showed up. I wasn't surprised. My mom had always been the type to smooth things over in person, thinking that if we just sat down and talked, everything could be solved. But this wasn't something a hug and a plate of cookies could fix. I heard the knock at the door just as I was making coffee. When I opened it, there they were, Mom, eyes puffy and red, and Dad standing behind her with that stern, "We need to talk" expression he always wore when I was a kid. I'm not interested, I said, starting to close the door. Please, my mom begged, holding out her hand. Just give us a chance to explain. You already explained, I said, leaning against the doorframe. You lied. You let Jake steal from me, and you covered for him. What else is there to say? We didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her voice cracking. We thought we were helping him get back on his feet. You've always been the strong one. We didn't think you need the money right away. That's the problem, I said, my tone cold. You assumed I'd be fine because I've always been fine. And Jake, he gets a free pass, as usual. Do you even realize how exhausting it is to always be the one who's okay? I've worked for everything I have, and you handed it to him like it was nothing. Dad sighed. We'll pay you back, he said. Every penny. I scoffed. With what? You're not exactly rolling in extra cash, and Jake sure as hell isn't going to pay me back. The money's gone, and you know it. Mom stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. We know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But don't shut us out like this. We love you. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. I stared at her for a moment, trying to decide if I had any sympathy left. I wanted to, but every time I thought about my empty savings and how close I'd come to losing my car, I felt that wall go back up. What about what's best for me? I asked quietly. When was the last time you thought about that? She didn't have an answer. Dad, always the pragmatist, tried to salvage the conversation. Look, we know Jake screwed up. But cutting us off isn't the solution. We're still your family. No, I said firmly. You stopped being my family the moment you decided Jake's problems were more important than my trust. Dad's expression darkened. You can't just walk away from us. I can and I am, I said. I'm done being the one who has to hold everything together while Jake gets to fall apart. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Mom sobbed into her hands, and Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but I wasn't going to give them the chance. I stepped back and shut the door. The sound of it closing felt final, like a chapter in my life had ended. I stood there for a moment, listening to their muffled voices on the other side of the door. Mom was crying, begging Dad to say something, but he didn't. Eventually, I heard their footsteps retreat down the hallway. I didn't move until the sound of their car starting faded into the distance. The days after that conversation were strangely quiet. No texts. No calls. Not even the usual guilt-ridden emails from my mom. For the first time in years, I felt like I had space to breathe. But the silence wasn't comforting, it was heavy, like the calm before another storm. I wasn't naive. I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. Sure enough, a week later, I got a message from Jake. It wasn't an apology. It was more of a half-baked excuse, the kind he'd always relied on to smooth things over when he screwed up. Jake, I didn't mean for things to get so bad. I was desperate, man. You know I've always looked up to you. Can we just meet and talk? I didn't respond. He didn't deserve a sit-down conversation where he could try to charm his way out of trouble. But it wasn't just that. I was done being the fixer. If he wanted to clean up his life, he'd have to do it without me. Instead, I took steps to protect myself. I changed the locks on my apartment, and called the bank to move my remaining funds into a new account. The thought of Jake, or anyone else, getting access to my finances again made me sick. I also contacted a friend who worked in auto repairs and asked him to replace the GPS tracker on my car. If anyone shows up trying to sell it, I told him, call me first. He laughed, but I wasn't joking. The hardest part was letting go of the idea that my parents would ever see things my way. For years, I'd thought that if I just worked hard enough, stayed responsible, and played by the rules, they'd finally see me for who I was, someone worth fighting for. But now I knew better. They didn't see me. They saw stability, a safety net they could rely on whenever Jake needed a bailout. And I wasn't their safety net anymore. As I packed up the spare key I'd taken back from Jake, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to them, and now, all that effort felt like wasted energy. But at the same time, I felt free. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their excuses. All I needed was to move forward, even if that meant moving on without them. A few weeks passed, and the messages from my family stopped altogether. At first, I thought they'd finally given up, but I knew better. Silence didn't mean resolution, it just meant they were waiting for me to come back on my own, like I always had before. But this time, I wouldn't be crawling back. One night, I sat in my apartment, the glow of the city casting shadows across my living room. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a split second, I thought it might be my parents. But when I picked it up, it was a notification about a deposit, a small but unexpected refund from a cancelled service I'd forgotten about. It wasn't much, but seeing my bank balance tick up, even by a little, reminded me of something important. I was rebuilding. My savings were gone, sure. The trust I'd had in my family was shattered. But I could rebuild both. I stood by the window, looking down at the cars lining the street below. My car was parked right where it should be, locked and safe. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it, how close I'd come to letting Jake's problems drag me down with him again. But I hadn't. I'd walked away, and I wasn't going back. As I watched the city hum with life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. My family could make their choices, and I could make mine. I didn't need to save Jake. I didn't need to fix my parents. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. This was my life now, and for the first time, it was mine alone.